Guys, so while I'm in the seemingly never-ending process of editing some of the other videos that I have coming out, such as the other parts for the Madagascar video, if you have not watched that, I'm not sure if I could put it somewhere around here, but go to my channel and watch it. It's really great. I think Malala shared a lot of interesting stuff about Madagascar. Okay, but what I'm here to talk about today, and I've kind of done a little bit of shorts on this topic, but I feel like few people have really addressed why it is that people from Charleston, New Orleans sound so Caribbean. And we're not going to sit up here and pretend that that's not kind of like the talk of the town, like people aren't going around and saying that. I have heard people saying it on on like social media and stuff like that. And interestingly, I was just watching some videos on the difference between like the Baton Rouge and the New Orleans accent, and a lot of people were saying like it might be their similarities, but some people are like the people from New Orleans, like they sound like island guys. They don't sound anything like Baton Rouge. So I know a lot of people are probably wondering like why that is, and I don't know if people are hesitant to talk about it because they don't want to be kind of conflated with other ethnic groups, which is definitely a thing. So just to preface before I talk about any of this, know that the Louisiana Creoles, the Gullah Geechee are separate ethnicities. They are separate ethnic groups in their own right. They are not the same as each other, nor are they the exact same as any other ethnic group in the Caribbean. Okay? If we're going to talk about like Charleston in particular, we know that we definitely do have, especially in the neighboring islands of downtown Charleston, we definitely have the presence, historical presence of the Gullah Geechee, and the Gullah Geechee corridor actually, like in my upcoming video, we'll talk about kind of expands well beyond the borders of even current South Carolina. But I think Charleston in particular has an interesting history that definitely sets it apart from other cities and counties and that we consider Gullah Geechee. First of all, the first interesting, I guess, piece of history that you want to consider is that the very first Africans that settled in Charleston were actually from Barbados. Okay, the first people to settle Charleston and the greater South Carolina area in about 1670 were from Barbados. Okay. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Gullah Geechee, Gullah, the Creole language, comes from Bayesian Creole, but or one connection to the West Indies. So if you have long standing ties to South Carolina, like your family has been there since the 1600s, guess what? You probably are West Indian. You probably are Bayesian. So I guess that gives you like a possible like connection to Rihanna, which is like kind of cool, as well as many other people from Barbados. So another thing that you want to consider is that about a little over 100 years after that happened, large or a rather significant migration of people from Saint-Domingue, which would later become Haiti, actually migrated to Charleston, including my fifth great grandfather with his parents. Okay. A lot of people don't know about that, but yeah. So you might say, well, who exactly came to Haiti? Largely, it was, well, I believe I read that it was about equal parts, more or less. By equal parts, I mean there were white people, former landowners, former slave owners who were trying to get out of the turmoil that was the Haitian Revolution. We had free people of color, okay, and we had the two former groups. They did kind of smuggle in, or actually, I don't think slave importation was illegal at that time. So, well, regardless, they brought a number of African slaves with them from Dumna Bank. So the thing is, if you were from Charleston, you very well could be connected to these individuals, because it wasn't like a few, it was hundreds, if not thousands, okay? And think about just one single person who came over from Dumna Bank has so many descendants. So that just opens up, the possibility that if you're from Charleston, I would say between the Bajan connection and the Dumna Bank connection, really likely that there's some sort of, West Indian background, right? And that could definitely influence the accent. You hear similar sounds, similar pronunciations and stuff like that, right? So if we begin to talk about New Orleans, right, similar stuff going on, like South Carolina, in particular Charleston. I didn't mention this, but there were, as it was a port city, there were a number of enslaved people who were brought over from the West Indies, and that's a little bit hard to track down, but that definitely was a thing. At one point, the U.S. preferred slaves from the West Indies, but then after the Haitian Revolution, it was kind of like everywhere else but Haiti, because they were like, yeah, you guys are like, those are the rambunctious doing. We don't want any idea having y'all try to revolt and thing up here. So essentially. But why West Indian slaves were preferred was because, they were considered to be broken in. They were already acclimated, established in the whole slavery system. Whereas, like, if you were importing slaves from Africa, they were, like, kind of free their whole life or whatever. They would be like, why am I a slave? And they're going to, like, try to, escape and everything. Anyway, not to say that other slaves would maybe want their freedom as well, but, it was more of a chance, and they would have a harder adjustment, essentially. Okay, so we had, I've seen places. I know for Louisiana it is documented. For South Carolina, I'm still kind of looking for some good records, but definitely if you were from, in particular New Orleans, but even all of Louisiana, you could see, Gwendolyn Middle Hall, RIP, she compiled a really extensive database, detailing the origins of many enslaved people, and it's kind of like, this is like extreme work. The only issue for my people interested in genealogy and family history is that those records only go up until about 1820. So you have to get yourself from like the 1870 mark to the 1820, and you may say, oh, it's just 50 years. 50, a lot can happen. People used to have babies really early back then. So a lot can happen between then and now, even I have a little bit of trouble kind of making the connection even for some of my family members, because I'm like, all right, we're here in 1870. Well, and you have to think about, there were you have to know names and stuff like that. People they adopted different surnames maybe, and there are no surnames listed in the database, so you have to just kind of go based on first name, and you have to know a little bit about where they maybe came to, because maybe that by 1870 they had already migrated to a new place. Enfin bref, there's a lot to consider, and this is why genealogy is hard. Anyway, so back to what I was talking about. In the case of New Orleans, yes, you did have like Charleston, a lot of enslaved people coming in from the Caribbean. Most notably, I've seen places mentioned such as Jamaica, And what else have I seen? I've seen definitely Jamaica. I've seen a little bit of Barbados, stuff like that. Okay. And but in terms of New Orleans, we had a huge migration of people from Saint Domingue between through basically during that same period of the Haitian Revolution. So some people went to Charleston, some people went to New Orleans. That's just kind of how it worked. And there were multiple waves that people both came to Charleston and to New Orleans. It wasn't just kind of like one migration. This is why it was a significant amount of people, because some people left in the early 1790s. Some people didn't leave until the turn after the turn of the century. In particular for New Orleans, it also received a crap ton of people from Cuba, because here's the thing, France essentially started beefing with Spain, and so Spain was like, all right, well, get all your people out of my colony of Cuba. And so now a lot of people who had went there previously from Saint Domingue, and they were actually thriving. I just read some great scholarship on the French descended people in Cuba, of which my fifth grade grandmother was one as well, and they were thriving. They were they started up they had started up slavery again in Cuba. That's so ironic, because the interesting thing is, like, they had to get out of Saint Domingue, where they had been living like probably their whole lives, because of the fact that they have had a slave revolt. So you would think like maybe they would have thought like, hey, maybe this slavery stuff is a little too risky. But then when they got to Cuba, they were like, "Aight, next attempt." And I guess it kind of worked or whatever, because it was working, and they started up the coffee. That was a big thing. A lot of people talk about Cuban coffee. You know who started that in Cuba? The French from Saint Domingue. They started up. They built thousands and thousands of coffee. What do you call it in Spanish? Like cafe. See, I don't remember what it's called, but coffee plantations essentially. Before they got their asses kicked out, essentially. Anyway, so but yeah, that happened, and then a lot of them went from Cuba to New Orleans in 1809. So that's another connection right there. I've also, in looking through records, I've seen people from even like Martinique and stuff like that migrating to New Orleans. I've seen people from Saint Barth or St. Bart's migrating to New Orleans. So it's just like, because of their geographical location and history, this is why you see that New Orleans and Charleston are really kind of like set apart. They're really West Indian AF, quite frankly, and that is kind of why they sound different, and why the culture is different, why it looks different. And I go into a little bit more detail and explain a little bit more on the podcast. So if you haven't followed the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and stay tuned for more. Bye.